What it created was a starch structure that gets the blood sugar level up higher than even sugar. Let me show you. This starch structure is called amylopectin A. And amylopectin A gets the blood sugar level up very high, very fast, then you've got a corresponding dump. Let me give you something to compare it to. Amylopectin B is found in bananas and potatoes, and if you're familiar with the glycemic index of food, that gets it up relatively high, relatively fast. So the B, so this is the A. What's the B? The B is not quite as high, not quite as fast, not quite as low. And for the diabetic, they still want to keep away from the B. Amylopectin C is found in chickpeas or garbanzos, lima beans, black-eyed beans, lentils, all your legumes. So amylopectin C gets a nice steady rise. Sorry, I can't draw off the board or I'd be over there. There's your C. That's what every single cell in the body wants. It wants a steady, consistent, sure delivery of fuel. So let's have a look at the glycemic index of food, considering this. 55 is your baseline, so under 55 are your low GIs. So cherries, in fact just about all your berries, they sit at 25, whereas grapefruit, it sits at about 24. So people who want a nice low delivery of fuel, like your diabetics, they're your better fruits. Where does sugar sit? Sugar sits at 59, whether it's white or tan or brown. Where does white bread? Let's have a look at white bread. So that's your refined wheat. It sits at 69. Wow, so your white bread will get the blood sugar level up higher than sugar. But what's a really shocker is whole wheat. So your whole wheat, it sits at 72. Now how could that be? How could whole wheat get the blood sugar level up higher than white bread? Because it's not refined, it has more amylopectin A in it, and it's the amylopectin A that gets that blood sugar level up. One lady was talking to my husband and she said, how come Barbara says white bread's better than wholemeal bread? He said, what? Of course whole wheat bread has more fibre. Of course it has more B vitamins. What I'm referring to here is the starch structure. And it was the hybridization process that did it. You still can get ancient grains. The original wheat was called Enkenhorn, and you can still get that. Spelt, kamut. They're ancient grains. They haven't been hybridized, and so they haven't got this amylopectin A in them. If you want to pursue this a little bit more, there's an excellent book by Dr. Davis, William Davis. It's called Wheat Belly. And he gives the whole story of what happened to the wheat. He also quotes Dr. Norman Bourlag, who got a Nobel Prize in the early 70s because of this hybridized wheat. And no one complains about wanting to have more food to save the starvation crisis, but the safety studies were never done. And this explains the absolute explosion that we're seeing in diabetes today. And what are diabetics told to eat? Whole wheat bread, whole wheat pasta, whole wheat. Are they healing? No, they're not. They're not. So that explains so much. It's what they've done to the wheat. That's the problem. We're not talking about the original wheat. Caffeine. How many Americans woke up to these three this morning? The coffee and the muffin, the coffee and the croissant, the coffee and the toast, the coffee and the cereal. So what's the problem with caffeine? Let me show you. Our nervous system is made up of nerve cells, and these nerve cells are different to other cells. These nerve cells make up our electrical system. These nerve cells communicate with each other via little chemical messengers. This is the nerve cell. What I'm drawing now is the arm coming out, the little boutons at the end of the filaments, and here is the next nerve cell. So our nervous system, and by the way, there are 1 trillion of these in our brain, they communicate with each other via little chemical messengers. Here's the little chemical messengers. They're coming in. They're encapsulated in the nucleus. They're sent down the arm into the little boutons, and then they release out to the next nerve cell. Now those nerve cells, with their little neurotransmitters, they can be communicating at anywhere between 2 and 200 miles an hour. In a crisis, they're moving very fast. What caffeine does is it interferes with these neurotransmitters. So one is adenosine, and adenosine is a neurotransmitter that acts like the brakes. And when caffeine goes into the body, adenosine levels drop. You know what that means? Brakes are failing. Our brain runs according to precision balance. So when the brakes start to fail, the body says, whoa, quick, we're lacking brakes. Develop extra receptor sites on every dendrite to grab every bit of adenosine that comes through. Then the person comes to Living Springs Retreat. We don't serve any coffee. Adenosine levels go back to normal. Receptor sites get flooded. Oh, does that hurt? That explains the pain and suffering we see in our guests that have been drinking coffee. We had one couple come, they're 2 girlfriends, they're in their 30s, and on the plane trip to our retreat, they decided to just get everything.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're going to a health retreat. They ate the chocolates and the Cokes and the coffees. Wow, those girls, they couldn't get out of bed for the first 24 hours. So if someone says to me, what can we do to prepare for the retreat? I say, stop the coffee. And that is actually too hard. So you know what I say? Ease off the coffee. The best way to do it is little by little by little. In the library here, there's a book called Caffeine Blues. And he's got a chapter called Coming Off the Bean. And he shows how you can do it without pain and suffering. He says every day just have a little less, a little less, a little less. Instead of having 3 cups of coffee a day, have 3 half cups of coffee a day, then a quarter, and then you just ease it out like that. The other neurotransmitter is acetylcholine, and acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter that has to do with brain function, and it rises when a person has a cup of coffee. Isn't that why people have coffee and work? Don't talk to me, I haven't had my coffee yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other one is dopamine. Dopamine is your pursuit of reward, pursuit of happiness hormone. It also rises with a cup of coffee. That's why you hear people say, oh, I love my coffee, just gets me going in the morning, makes me feel better, gets my brain going. Ah, yes, that's the acetylcholine, yes, that's the dopamine. But you can't keep doing it. It's like taking out a loan to pay off your loan. What's the old saying? Robbing Peter to pay Paul. Eventually, your adrenal glands are exhausted. Eventually, it's not doing it anymore. So instead of 3 cups of coffee a day, there has to go to 5 cups of coffee a day. It's an addictive cycle. No wonder people have chronic fatigue syndrome. It's usually a result of too much of the caffeine, too much of the stimulants. Headquarters. We're going to headquarters on Saturday morning. But these 2, they disrupt the fuel supply to the brain, and caffeine disrupts the chemical imbalance or the chemical balance in the brain, causing an imbalance. And yet, isn't that the breakfast most Americans start with? No wonder teachers are having trouble with teaching kids in the school when this is the breakfast.